Thank you very much, Andrea, for this invitation to the Foundation of Architecture, and especially also for these very, very kind words. No? Now I know that I will speak to architects, so I know perfectly to whom I address, not only architects I saw, but really mostly, which is usually what we do, by the way. No? It's good also to open the idea of architecture to everybody and not to a very limited group always, but I hope that those who are not architects here, and I saw that some of them are not, will maybe help to make understand what we do. And this is what I would like to show today. In other words, not only explaining one project after another, which, by the way, I will do as well, but trying to transmit the ideas that are behind the way we think as architects, the way we approach the architectural concepts that eventually, as you will see, get finally built, as is the case in most of the projects I will show. Actually, if we can turn the lights down or off, I would like to start with the lecture by talking about these main themes that refer to the issues and the ideas that are behind them. Basically, we try to use a series of ideas or concepts that relate to the ground. The ground is something that, of course, we all understand, that it's always a theme, an issue that we have to take into consideration, but it's for us, in some cases, more than that. We refer to the ground as also the origin of the architectural idea itself. The roofs have been, I think, is one of those forgotten elements in modern architecture. For most of the 20th century, the roof has been always and only the flat roof of Mies, Le Corbusier, and the Bauhaus. And nevertheless, we know, and we see, for example, in this beautiful city that I had the chance to visit today for the first time, that the roofs can be and they are actually, a very expressive part of the architectural conditions of the cities, and therefore of the architectural idea itself. The void, talking about voids, is a theme that is related definitely to space, and this is how we like to understand it, the architectural space conceived as a void. The patterns, which is a very personal way of understanding geometry, which sometimes has been considered like a constraint to the freedom of the architect, whether we really understand that it's really the tool with which we really work. And finally, this theme that is, in our point of view, overlapping, or it's in a way the leitmotif of our work, which is this idea of how memory relates to the contemporary interpretation in architectural terms. So these images will express more or less what I would like to show in different projects, which is that these themes are not really a classification of projects. They really constantly interfere one with another. A ground can be the origin of an architectural idea, an archaeological project, as you will see in Córdoba, or it can be simply the ground that you walk in a city like Graz, or can be a landscape that becomes the very origin of the architectural concept itself. The roofs that I mentioned before have become step by step, and not thinking consciously about that at the beginning, a whole way of understanding the project, in the sense that the roof eventually, and sometimes and many times, becomes the starting point. In Spain we say never start the house by the roof, but actually we start the house by the roof in many cases, and the roof becomes therefore the way of introducing natural light, and it becomes also the way therefore of transforming it into an architectural space. And this leads to this idea of the voids that I mentioned before. Of course, void can be expressed in many different ways when talking about architecture, but in our projects, to a certain extent, I would say that this idea of the negative space, the space in between, or say the interstitial spaces that build the architectural form, have become not only something that exists in the project, but really the whole thing, the whole theme of the architectural project itself. When I talk about this area of patterns, patterns for us relate very much to one concept, which is combinatorial thinking. In other words, to really achieve, say, the complexity of architecture by means of using a few number of limited elements that by repetition and variation, something that maybe relates clearly to issues like music, the way of approaching architecture, become really the tool or the instrument or the mechanism to work. Finally, as I said before, memory and invention would be this way of thinking that contemporary architecture finds its roots in the memory of the past. Whether we talk really about specific historic buildings where we have been working in the last years, as you will see, or simply by means of expressing this relationship that sometimes is very personal. It's about our own experience, our own travels, our own lectures, that establish this sort of balance that at the end is what we try to achieve. So what I'm going to show at the end is a sort of mosaic or system series of projects that are not shown here today in a chronological order, because I don't believe that's the thing that interests me more today, but rather in this sort of idea that all of them share these questions. Our work is actually, I would say, 90% a consequence of competitions. That's the reason, probably, that it is, though we are architects from Madrid, our work is almost never in Madrid, except a couple of cases. And it's in different places, in different countries nowadays. And as a consequence of that, they represent a way of interpreting something that we see with our own eyes and try to transform. In other words, what you will see here now is also a trip, a travel, a journey through different cities, here I think in Europe in this lecture, and we will start by one that maybe some of you know. This is the city of Halle. Halle an der Saale in Germany, a city that not many people know, not even many Germans when I explain this in Germany, because it's a small town in the former DDR, nowadays somehow depressed economically, but it was, and it still is, a very strong cultural city that in the 18th century was one of the most important universities in Germany. In this city, there is the old town that was not that much destroyed during the war, as opposed to many other cities, as you know, in Germany and everywhere. And we have a very important building among them, which is this Schloss Moritzburg. What you see here in one of the originally drawings of the 16th century, the building was actually built at the end of the 15th century. 1485, the Bishop of Brandenburg built this Schloss, which was his own residential palace and place, that had, as you can imagine, a very long history, like all the buildings of centuries ago, with demolitions, destructions, reconstructions. Actually, the building was strongly, severely destroyed in the Dreißigjährige Krieg, the war of the 30 years in the 17th century. The wings, the north and the west wing, became a ruin, as you see. And actually, the images that are shown in this museum, for example, that one of these romantic aquarelles or watercolors of the 19th century, express this ruin. It was important because when we entered the competition, we were shocked by this fact that the building, though it was a museum, partially, it was called the Ruine. So we thought that the ruin was an important thing. Actually, also it was important for us to know that there were several ideas to reconstruct it. For example, this is a not very well-known drawing by Schinkel, who in the early 19th century had a project to rebuild the whole castle. It was the only full project or integral reconstruction project that was never built, nevertheless. So when we entered the competition, The drawings and the paintings that were hung in the museum itself, as you see here, one of them, were quite similar to the state we found the north and the west wing of the place, of the castle. In other words, a ruin of a very long space, as you see here, that was still in the memory of the inhabitants of Halle, the ruine that we thought we should really, in a way, keep. The other thing was the roofs that I mentioned before, and I mentioned several times during the lecture, because for you, of course, the roofs are more familiar, because I saw today Luxembourg and I know Central and Northern Europe, and the roofs are really very steep roofs that belong to the tradition and the history from the medieval Renaissance times and so on. Coming from the south of Europe, as I am coming, for us it was shocking. In Spain, the roofs mostly are not so steep. They tend to be more linked, especially in southern Spain, to the flat roof, etc. So we thought that we really should react also with this idea that the new building should express not only a ruin, but also a roof. A roof that we thought it was not only linked to the castle itself, but, for example, if you see here the church in the Frauenkirche in the center of Halle, and more than that, the way a painter that we admire very much and is exhibited in the museum, which is Feininger, that you see here, was painting these roofs of the city of Halle. At the time, Feininger was living in the castle where we had to do this competition. So at the end, all these elements came in a way together, and our answer to this extension of the museum that we were asked in the competition was simply to build a new roof. This new roof, of course, is an abstraction of these ideas. It's a contemporary roof. It's a geometrical, say, system of folded elements that create, say, positive and negative skylights. This roof has to be understood, as you see here, as something that will hang on top of the ruin without, say, metaphorically, without touching the ruin, though it will touch it, of course, in several points, without adding any column or any other element disturbing the space. There will be also a tower that you see here in one of the missing towers since the 17th century. If you see the section of the building, the whole intention is to leave this very, very long space of 90 meters and 18 meters wide, and to add the new exhibition rooms that we were asked by in the middle of these hanging boxes. So the building, once built, tries to express these elements that for us were so important. The ruin that you still perceive in the stone walls, the new hanging box of this structure above, that is expressed maybe better when looking to the model and the way the model shows simply what we are doing in the project, and the way actually this roof tries to establish a sort of conversation that at the end is very personal between this abstraction, contemporary element that we are building on top and the roofs of the existing historical castle there. But there are some images of the roof in construction. The roof actually, when finished, expresses this intention that we wanted for the building, which is this idea that the roof expresses this will to avoid gravity, which we all architects have in a way, and also the museum itself, the ruin of the castle, expresses the opposite, the will to belong to the earth, which we also as architects constantly deal with. So this idea of below ground, above ground. The roofs become also, in our personal point of view, a very abstract sculpture piece, and an element that you can see from above, built in a very precise aluminum panel that simply reacts to the pitch roofs of the other place. This is forbidden, but we did it with our office the day we went there to feel this situation in top of these skylights. The tower was built a little bit later, and for us expresses as well this idea that was behind, also linked to the exhibition of the expressionist, German expressionist art that is the main collection of this museum. So the roof expresses this theme that I am trying to talk about. This idea that the roof relates to the city, creates a section, the section brings the natural light and forms a space. This is something that in different moments and different projects we have been dealing with. Projects that I'm not going to show today, but this is, for example, a Congress Center for the Expo 2008, in which the whole system of roof, which is in this case built with GRC panels with ceramic, define this sort of roofscape that defines the section of the interior spaces, or in a more precise way linked to the history and to the interpretation of a place in the building that I'm going to show you in the next one, which is the one you see here. In this sort of trip through Europe, we go to Austria and to the city of Graz, that maybe some of you know is a beautiful city, which is in the historical part of the historical center. It's a World Heritage City, like it happens to be here, and I saw this morning in the old town of Luxembourg. And in this historical city, Weltkulturerbe of UNESCO, we had the chance to do two different projects, two extremely different projects, as you will see, but very close one to the other. This is a project for an extension of a department store, originally from the late 19th century, with a Jugendstil building, with several buildings, etc., that had to be extended. The city is World Heritage for many reasons, as you know, but one specific one because of the roofs. Actually, when you look at the images like that of the 19th century, you see these beautiful roofs of Graz that you can see from the Schlossberg, which is a small mountain that maybe some of you know. And from there on, you see still nowadays a not so different landscape. On the other side of the river, the area is not protected by UNESCO. It's a place where you see a building that surely you know, by Peter Cook and the Kunsthaus, but this is on the other side of the river. On this side of the river, everything is extremely protected by UNESCO, linked to this issue of World Heritage. But if you look to the beautiful roofs a little bit more carefully, you see that not all of them are so beautiful. And in part of this area that belongs to this department store called Kastner & Oehler, that owns several buildings and was extended during the last century, actually, you see all these sheds, all these mechanical rooms, technical staff, extensions, etc. So they wanted to extend this area. To do it, they did an international competition. They involved all the people linked to heritage, and we propose the project that you will see here, which is basically on what you will see now. You see the Jugendstil building in the center, a 17th century on the right side. This is the original state of the building one day, 100 years ago. These were all the extensions that were added in the last, basically after the 1960s and 70s, which is when the big changes were done. So our proposal became, again, a simple, straightforward decision. We should only build a new roof. The new roof on top of the existing department store would express a connection or a relation with the historical roofs of the city. But it was going to do it, nevertheless, with a new geometrical system and pattern that relates one to the other, but expresses as well that all these different buildings below belong now to a single institution, now even a private institution as it is. So if you look at the section, all the slabs below, they are the department store. Another architect is working there, and they're simply doing our proposal is the one you see on top, which is a system of variations, and this has to do with this idea of patterns, variations of one single element, a V-shaped skylight, sometimes to the north, sometimes to the south, sometimes going down, defining a connection that was important for us with the interior spaces, not only adding a roof on top, and also connecting to the old historical places. Actually, the building was, the competition is already 5 or 6 years ago. The construction started soon, then it stopped. Now it's stopped in the last 2-3 years, waiting to be finished. I show here a couple of images of the state in which it is now. In the upper part is all the restaurants, which have to do with an important question for us. The idea was with the roofs, not only defining roofs that create eventually interesting spaces, it is also this idea that was linked to the fact that the beautiful and the very interesting pedestrian areas of a city like Graz, and by the way, as I saw today in Luxembourg, could be taken to the roofs, to the upper part, and define again public spaces in the roofscape of the city. This idea was really liked very much by the client that, as a consequence, organized a series of, as you see here, public terraces for cafes, etc., above the city. Yeah? So the building, as you see, is in this situation. Those who can read German, that I think here is everybody, can read Bronzedacht kommt. This is linked to the fact that our proposal is supposed to be finished with a bronze cladding, in a way similar to the German museum you saw before. In this very moment, some of the sheds are built and in use. Some others are not finished in this right part of the city, of the building. And eventually one day they will finish in a similar way to the one you see here. Linked to this idea that the roofs of the city can and should become in this project also a public area that you can work with. It was, and it is interesting for us to show these projects together. They happen to be designed and built in almost the same years, 4 years ago. This one a little bit later, which is the Joanneum Museum. And I like to show it together, not only because they are both in Graz, but because they deal with two extreme situations. One is only with the roofs. We are not doing anything below. The other one is only with the ground, with the level of the surface where you walk, of the plaza, the patios, the Höfe, something that attracted us so much from the city. So in this case, we are in the same city, as I mentioned before, just a little bit in the south, still in the protected area of UNESCO. We are in an area that belongs to the Joanneum. Joanneum Museum is the second most important museum institution in Austria, after the museums of Vienna, that of course are the first. And they own a lot of very interesting historical buildings. They own also, for example, modern buildings like the Kunsthaus by Peter Cook that you saw before. In this case, we were in this building that you see there, which is Naturhistorisches Museum. This is of the 18th century. Another building, which is the Art Museum of the end 19th century, and the Library of Steiermark, which is also the end of the 19th century. So we have this situation in which there are three buildings together. They belong to the same institution, but they work giving their backs one to the other. They don't share anything. They had an intermediate space behind that was not used by the public. It was closed. So the competition was asking for this issue that has become a theme in many museums in Europe, which is how to extend them, how to organize a new entrance, how to integrate different areas of different buildings, etc. So our proposal was linked to this idea that I mentioned before. We should, and this is what they decided, work only in the level of the streets and the plazas, the level of the pedestrians. This level that usually maybe we don't pay so much attention as architects because we feel that we need to build objects. Actually, our project was the only one of the entries that didn't build an object. All the others did. So our proposal was to create a new plaza, a new public plaza for the city, and below ground, as you maybe can imagine in these images, a series of conical perforations would create courtyards. These courtyards would bring the light into the new areas that will connect below ground the three different buildings, the museum, the historical museum, and the library. Yeah, maybe you see it a little bit better if you look at the section. So on the left side over there, you see one of the buildings, the 18th century buildings with the patio. On the right side, the 19th century art museum. In the middle, below ground, these two levels with a series of conical patios. They also link to this fact that I mentioned before. These conical patios, they look different, and they are different, but they all come from one, imagine, virtual huge cone that you cut in different slices. And the way you put them together, it creates a sort of pattern, again, which is variations of one single element that is always different and always the same. This is a plan below ground, where you see, in this case, in yellow or orange, the patios and the different areas that will connect to the different spaces. So, in other words, to work with this idea of using variations of one single element is also, a conceptual economy. And I'm not talking about only economy in terms of euros also, but it is the economy in the sense of the only important thing we had to do, so to say, is to define very well one cone. And once one cone is well defined, the rest are variations of the same, say, basic detail, the same material. So, in other words, a series of sort of drops in this landscape of the new plaza that we were thinking for the city. And when you go below, here it was important to bring the light. We are working, and you will see some other buildings in Spain and sometimes in southern Spain. There the sun becomes an important thing to control because it's very strong, as you probably know. In Central Europe, as you also know, you try to bring the sun in. Yeah? So what the cone itself helps to do that, but it helps also to reflect, and this is an interesting question of these patios or courtyards, to reflect the historical buildings that we were extending as well, so that when you are below in this entrance hall that organizes the building and allows you to go to the different places, you see also the buildings above that we also renovated, also the two buildings that you see on the left and on the right. And during the night, the building becomes this sort of almost installation or visual installation in the city of Graz. This short video shows this relationship between the ground and the roof that was important for us in these projects in Graz. Actually, as you see, this idea relates to something that we also, in most of the project, tried to do. So we were asked to make a museum extension, but we added a public plaza. This is something that has to do also with this project we are going to see, in this case, in Spain, in northern Spain. A project that is not only a museum, as it is, or a visitor center in this case, but also, as you will see, a new public garden for the city of Lugo, because in this case, we are in the north of Spain, in the northwest of Spain, maybe some of you know, because the north of Spain is quite different in the climate to the south, that we'll see later, so it's a green Spain in the northern area on top of Portugal. And in this city of Lugo, that is a relatively small city with a very important historical Roman wall. The city has these walls surrounding the whole town, the best kept Roman walls in Spain. And the project was organized in order to do this, or to design this visitor center, not in the area of the ruins of the walls, but in an old industrial area close to the city center that had been demolished and reorganized for different uses. Yeah? So for us, working in an area that, on the one hand, was an industrial site that was already demolished but had the memory of the industry, and being in a place like Lugo for a history museum, as it is the theme of the competition, and Lugo is so strongly related to the image of these cylindrical walls, our proposal started to work with these three themes, how to really connect these two apparently opposite situations, and define, as it happened in some of our projects, not to say in most of them, to define again one single element. The single element that you see in this model of the competition was this series of cylinders. These cylinders that recall the industrial silos and the ruins of the Roman walls, sometimes are positive, so they come out of the landscape. Sometimes are negative, so they really create patios. What we did here is to propose, instead of a museum, an interactive museum or visitor center for the people that come to visit Lugo, and they will get this information before visiting the real ruins, it was also to create a new park. This park is what you see there in this model, a consequence of this topographic difference between the upper part and the lower part, and so that the building becomes a very buried building below ground, as you see here, especially because the museum, even though it's called officially museum, the name is Interactive Museum of the History of Lugo. That means that it will show not really pieces, it will show only audiovisual installations related to the history. So basically the building has a very big black box, which is the space that you see below there, and this interlocking system of positive and negative cylinders will bring the light down in some cases, or simply express and connect the different areas of the museum. So this was the working model, and for the working model to the project, the whole idea gets expressed in this variation, again, permutations, if you want to say, of one single element that has the same architectural detail, so to say, that uses the same material. In this case, it's Corten steel, not opaque, but with this sort of metal mesh that creates not only this more or less transparency that we wanted to achieve related to these industrial buildings that one day were there, but also can illuminate the building in the night. Therefore, this small park in the city will almost not need another type of lighting. For us, it was interesting, this almost romantic image of the ruin, being a contemporary ruin that is built new. When you go down, you will have this courtyards illuminated by these round walls. They will connect these intermediate spaces. These intermediate spaces sometimes will have a special illuminated areas through skylights. Again, the section as a consequence of how the natural light is coming from above. And during the night, the building becomes also this sort of series of lanterns in the middle of this green area in the city. So below ground again, and here I will show you another building which is also below ground. You will think by now that we only build below ground, but you see that we like also the roofs. You see that we are a little bit extreme, either over there or either below there. This is an important building for us, an important project. This is the city, the museum of the city of Madinat Al-Aahra, Medina Zahara, as it's called in Spanish, which was one of the most important cities in the times when the Arabs ruled over Spain during centuries. And this is the archaeological museums of these ruins that actually are the most important archaeological site in Spain because of the quantity of the ruins and the quality, because this city was built in the year 940, so more than 1,000 years ago, but it was completely destroyed in the year 1010, so exactly 1,000 years ago. Destroyed not by the Christians, they were destroyed, but other troops of North Africa that took over the Caliphate of Córdoba, which was ruling Spain at the time, when Córdoba was really the capital of this caliphate. But the king, the caliph, built the city as a statement of his power that was really quite important at the time, and the richness and of the culture of the Arabs in the 10th century. The fact is that it became a ruin immediately, and even when the Christians took over, that was in the 12th century, this was already forgotten. This was already the old palace of the king that nobody knew exactly what it was. So it was forgotten in history till the end of 19th century, when finally it was founded again, and it was recognized as the famous palace city of Madinat Al-Aahra. So this is a story because it's important, because for us working in a new museum, an archaeological museum of a big dimension, in this case it's a museum of 10,000 square meters, for not only a museum, also a place for the archaeologists, for the workshops, for the storage of this archaeological material, plus all these elements like cafeteria and shops and elements that our contemporary museum has. The question was how to relate to the memory of this history that was behind, not only the Arabs speaking like that, but also the archaeology itself, the way archaeology represents this theme that is very much about architecture, which is to build and to destroy. So this strange balance between construction, destruction that constantly is related to the work of an architect. So this issue was the idea that led us to the theme that was like the motto of the competition, that we were not acting as, architects, but as archaeologists. In other words, we simply had to dig below ground and find the museum. That was what we were asking the competition. So with this idea, what we express as that the building is actually a building, in this case, clearly below ground, that plays with this reference to the excavation of this box-type excavation that the archaeologists do not do anymore with the new technological systems, but for centuries it was really the system, to make boxes, to eliminate layers of ground, and eventually to find the museum below. This idea for us was the real leitmotif of the whole project, because at the same time the archaeologists were doing what you see over there. These are the ruins of Madinat Al-Aahra, with one of the mosques that are found. We were working, and every day we went to the site supervision, we were feeling that the idea of this construction, destruction was really there. As a consequence of that, since we were working like that, we should find the project. What means to find the project? That as far as we've built the walls, that's the reason we choose concrete, in this case it's white concrete linked to the color of Andalusia, the color of the whole city. The very moment the wall is done, it's already finished. And this sort of idea led to the whole process of the project. The project is organized in patios, the same way Of course, the Arab city was organized, as you know, it's always patios, some of them square, some of them deep, some of them linked to a wall. These patios organize a program that is not only museum, it's also, as you see, auditorium, cafeteria, library, offices, and all the right part is a system of storage spaces and workshops linked to the museum itself. When the building was finished, the idea is that it should disappear in this archaeological and, say, agricultural landscape of Andalusia and of Córdoba. It's only in some part, the building, as you see here, is seen it has a couple of meters high. You have a ramp. After this ramp, you go down. The materials are limited to the extreme. It's always white concrete cast with wooden elements, one by one, in the roofs, in the floor, in the slabs. The other material is only the curtain steel that you will see. It relates also to this idea that the city was called Madinat Al-Aahra, apparently the shiny city, that it was a very white city that only used two colors, the red color of the ceramic and the white of the walls. That's the reason it was used here as well. The building is below ground, but again, it establishes a relation to the landscape, as you see, of the Sierra of Córdoba behind. The relation to this Islamic old city was for us important in terms of perception and not, of course, of a mimetic reproduction of say, Moorish images. What do I mean? For example, the very small perforations in the wall that protect from the sun, the water ponds that you listen in the sound of the trees with the smell. Some of the patios are really deep, coming 2 floors below ground, to protect, in this case I have to say, to protect from the very, very strong sun of southern Spain, so that really the sun reflects, as you see here. In the museum itself, we're talking about a double space of 7 meters high, again made of this single material, with the skylights on top. There is a moment where you can go up in the museum area, and in the distance you see in the only upper part the ruins that you will going to visit. In this case, we had the opportunity to design as well the interior museographic installation, something that not always happens, but in this case we were able. And so the installation itself is organized in this series of boxes with the same material in this steel concrete, curtain steel, and with the main pieces of this excavation that you afterwards people visit. Yeah? This is what you see here and what you see in this image. For us, are more important these other series of images. When you visit the museum, then you go to the ruins over there. And of course, contemporary architecture and our abstraction of forms are completely different than ours from our time. But we wanted to establish these references that maybe people do not perceive exactly, but maybe they feel. Yeah? Sequences of sun and shadow using one single material. In the ruins, the only material is the stone. In our museum, the only material is the white concrete. This sort of compression of space in some cases, or this sort of perspective points of view in some others. The other fact of this museum is the consequence of being below ground, that of course in this case, as we say, all architects in many cases, there's a fifth facade, but in this case we should say there's the only facade, because you can see it only from the very distance, in the hill of the ruins. When you are here, you see the way it's conceived, simply with very big plates of curtain steel, and the patios that are cut down below earth. In other words, a project that tries to reflect the series of connections that are interesting for us, that not only are the ones I mentioned, it's the Arab city, it's the ruins, it's the analogy to the work of the ruins, but for us, and that's the reason I like also these images, It's also the very agricultural landscape of the place where it is located. So material became here, and this is another important issue for us every time we decide how to build or with what material, became here a consequence of this idea that related our work to the work of the archaeologists, and therefore a material that should be finished when we do it. That's concrete. The building I'm going to show you now, it's another museum, in this case in San Sebastián in Spain, northern Spain. Again, in this trip we are going to the north, to a very different Spain in the Basque country, in which the material that we decided to use was really, again, a very important part of the architectural concept behind. We are in San Sebastián, a city that, like Córdoba, a city that I strongly recommend to visit for different reasons, Córdoba and San Sebastián. Both beautiful cities, one for its history, that's Córdoba. San Sebastián, besides the beauty of the landscape, the place where you can eat better in the world. I'm sorry to say it. And that's a good reason already. So in San Sebastián, we were invited in this competition for the extension of the Museum of San Telmo. San Sebastián has this origin that you see in the image. The Monte Urgul, that's a small hill surrounded by the sea, as you can see, and then the old town that you see here, which this was the origin that was extended with the modern city, etc. This is, for example, a very well-known project by Rafael Moneo, which is a Cursal, the beach, and here one of the most beautiful beaches, which is called La Concha. Well, in this area, where the city originated, the competition was asking for the extension of this very old building, 16th century convent, monastery, of San Telmo, which is one of the oldest buildings in the city, and has a very clear, you see, importance in the place where it is, which is a limit between the natural landscape of the hill and the urban landscape. So they really work in this limit in between. So the project that you see here in a model of the competition is extending. This is the old convent, which is already a museum. With a church, with a cloister, and the extension of the 1930s. And the building that we propose extends, almost doubles the space of the museum in the limit between the natural and the artificial. In a way, thinking that the new extension belongs more to the hill behind, to the Mount Urgul, than to the building below, the historical building. If you see, the building also incorporates public spaces like the stair that allows you to go up to the hill. It also relates, if you see here, to the military constructions. That, by the way, you have many here, as I saw, of these constructions of the old military walls, in this case of the 17th century, etc. Our proposal, if you look at it in a plan, deals with working in the almost impossible site that you see here. The mountain behind, the cloister here, and the space of the extension, which is this area that finds its way, creating intermediate spaces and separating itself from the historical building that we also restored. The building, the new extension, of course, incorporates again entrance, lecture hall, temporary exhibitions, cafeteria, service areas, delivery, etc. It's very interesting to see also the old building when you see the old, originally Gothic and then late Gothic and then Renaissance building, where the cloister is not really a square. I mean, it looks like when they started to build, the mountain was really making impossible to make the square they wanted to do. No? In any case, that was also important for us in order to find the geometry that the building was going to achieve. Yeah? This is a big model that we built later after winning the competition to see this theme of the skin and the material. The skin was not a decision of, so what is the skin? Why the skin? No, the skin here was relating to the mountain, how to relate to the mountain behind. On the one hand, it's again, like maybe it happened in some other projects of us, it's again an abstraction in a contemporary material, but in this case, used in a different way. We asked a couple of artists, good young artists and friends from the Basque Country, Ferran and Otero, to work together with us in the definition of this element. For this element, we decided in the office to define a sort of combinatorial system of panels. So we'll have a series of panels always of the same dimension, and with Ferran Otero, we propose a series of perforations that you see here. Walking around the site with them, what you see on the upper photograph are images of the rocks that you see in the coast of the San Sebastian, where of course the wind and the water has created these perforations, and the green is coming sometimes by chance. So the idea that we proposed together with Ferran Otero was, why don't we build this element that looks like stone, but it is not. It is cast aluminum done one by one with the artist, and in which a series of perforations will eventually permit that the green comes out in some places. In some places, because this is not a green building in the sense of a green facade, that there are many in different ways. It is more a sort of complex situation in which we have a pattern of, say, a semi-industrialized process in which each of these panels is 1.80 meters times 60. So you can divide it in three, you can put it vertical, horizontal, and we have 4 types of perforations. You don't see it very well there, but if you take a while, you will see that there is a small one, an intermediate one, a bigger one, and a very big one. So when you combine them in different ways, and this is the way the perforations are done, you have incredibly a lot of possibilities. Again, a purely combinatorial system, that when you see the building built, and the distance are not so visible, because in the distance the building appears more like a sculptural building. It relates more to these elements I said before, the existing historical building on the side. Over there on top, even if you don't see the military 18th century structures, but when you come closer, then you understand, or we think that the perforations help to break the scale of the building. Suddenly the perforations start to make a sort of conversation with the trees behind, or getting closer and closer. These photos were at the beginning, so the green is only in a couple of places. Now I don't know how much they control the green or not, but the idea is not to control it very much. Wherever it comes more, wherever it comes, like a little bit in the mountain. Yeah? So this is the entrance of the building. The intermediate patios are important. I mentioned before this theme of the void, if we can say it like that, understanding the negative space, the space in this case between the old that you see on the left and the new, which is this extension of the museum. The museum, or the perforations, have also this other way of interpreting it. It's not only that in some cases there is green, in some cases the perforation allows to have natural light inside, or the other way around during the night to create this impression. Yeah? I like this photography because it expresses very well where we had to work. You see all the historical buildings of the monastery, plus the other one which is behind, and then on the right side the mountain. Yeah? So in this very, very narrow space, the building had to take place. But of course, we believe that the most complex the situation, the most interesting the project, and the most challenging. And this is something we all know as architects. No? We prefer that than a blank paper, or at least me. And as a consequence of that, the interior spaces are long and narrow. In this case, using again one single material, which is the white concrete, again, with a similar pattern to the one I showed before. The hanging boxes that may be done in different ways, but related to the project I showed at the beginning. In this case, we couldn't do the interior installation, so the photos I show are empty, but the way the light is coming down becomes, again, one of the main issues. And also the way the building relates to the exterior, to this very beautiful old town of San Sebastián. On the left side, behind the museum, the old part that we restored, or the image that you see before, and definitely the new plaza, and the way this plaza, together with this intervention with Ferran Otero, becomes also an art intervention in the city. And so it was thought from the very beginning, and so it is. The building, as you see, is a very complex building, because I was focusing only in a couple of points, the relation with the artist, the mountain, the skin, but of course a very complex urban situation that deals with many questions, the sea behind the mountain, the connection, etc. To work in this complex urban context is part of this idea that I like to link to this fact of memory of the past, an invention, to use that word, of the contemporary architecture, even in completely new buildings, like the one I'm going to show you now, which is a building we very recently won for a hotel in Munich. Actually, again, we go up, not so far from you now, and we are in Invention, a city that I'm sure many of you know. In this case, we are in the limit of the Altstadt. So when you see this ring, this is the Altstadt, the old city, and this is exactly the limit, a very well-known plaza, which is Stachus or Karlstor here, or Stachus, a very busy place. So there is a hotel now. It's a 5-star hotel that inside is an old-looking hotel, but a very good hotel. But outside, it really is a not very happy building, as you maybe remember. No? And the owners know it, so that's the reason they organize a competition to really take a decision that is not so easy for an hotel owner, which is to demolish a building completely and to build something completely new with all the consequences, economical consequences that it has. So for us, the competition was, again, important to understand in relation not only to the site, the context, but also to the history that was behind. Yeah? For example, this was the place at the end of the 18th century. So whatever is called, what is Stachus nowadays, it had this Herrenhaus, a noble house, which was like a cube, a small cube. Later, in the 19th century and 20th century till the Second World War, the building became a famous hotel, Bellevue, and this hotel was, again, with a square plan in front of what you see here, like the Karlstor was at the time. The hotel was demolished, like so many things, during the war, and after the war, they rebuilt something that you see here, which is not so nice. And this building is this Königshof Hotel nowadays in the middle of this very busy place of the city. For us, when entering the competition, it was interesting also to understand how you perceive the place and how you go. For example, if you remember this pedestrian area which is the most busy commercial area in Munich, you go walking and you see the Karlstor, and behind suddenly you see how important becomes this building, because this not a very nice building of the Königshof is really in front of you, no? And when you come closer, it's exactly in the axis, and you go even closer, and then so this very axial situation makes of a private building, not so big, makes of it a very, very important urban question. Yeah? And this idea of frontality became the way we decided to react to the building. Our project therefore takes this idea not as a fact that everybody can read, but as the fact. The issue by means the proposal can be explained like a horizontal plaza that we will going to extend and to refurbish, and the new sort of vertical open space. So instead of simply putting all the floors with the program that we were asked, we proposed, again, this sort of semi-public space. Of course, it's private because it's a hotel, but it belongs and establishes a connection always, as you see here, with this sort of void, or this sort of extraction, subtraction of this mass, in order to create a lobby. At the end, this is a very big lobby, but instead of dealing with this idea of a vertical atrium that has been done in so many hotels, the idea, as you see, is a lobby that sometimes is very compressed, then it expands, then it creates a terrace, then it jumps over there till you go to the roof. So in other words, this sort of void that relates constantly the interior of the hotel to the exterior of the city. We won the competition. We are now starting the planning, and I hope one day we'll see it. We'll see more than the models as I show you here. Important is these images that we presented. Yeah, so to realize that really this building is not simply a private building in the city more. It's a private building in the city, but it has a very, very strong presence in nearby also important buildings in Munich, as the Justizpalast, which is the building that you see, or you will see right in the right side of the place. And this is an image during the day or during the night, and again in relation to the Palace of Justice. So the building is and can be explained through this idea of how to work with the void. How to work with the void is a way of understanding our, say, approach to different projects from a long time ago. For example, this project was a congress hall we did in Mérida, in southwest Spain, in a beautiful, also Roman city originally. In 2006 or something, we finished a building. And it was dealing with, in a way, the same system, conceiving a sort of a mass, and this mass we subtract what at the end becomes a negative space, which is the protagonist of the space. In this case, it's terrace looking to the river. Here we were working also with an artist, Esther Pizarro, in order to develop, again, and this is concrete, a combinatorial system of variations that relate to the memory of the old plan of the city of Mérida. But the important thing here is this void. The void establishes always this relation between outside and inside in a very compact or dense way, sometimes bringing the light, again, like we have done in several projects, down, in this case, to these very narrow patios. Again, I have to say, not the same in Graz than in Mérida, where the sun is so strong and you have to protect. And the building becomes a sort of strong piece of sort of a remote past that you don't know to what belongs exactly in front of the river. But here I'm not showing it today in detail, but just this idea of the void that has come in different ways in different projects. And actually what you see here is the last project we have finished. Actually, it is not completely yet inaugurated and in use. It is a building for once in Madrid. And this was a big competition that had to do with a large area in the center, in the very center of Madrid. Madrid, for those who don't know it, is a very dense city. Maybe it's not so beautiful always. Some places are, some not, but it's always very beautiful from an urban point of view, because it's a very dense city that you see here. In this area, we were asked to develop the landscape of all this yellow area that you see. And precisely here, in an old market of the 1950s or 40s of no quality that had to be demolished, there was a competition to transform the old market into one market, the same one, plus a sports hall for the community, plus a library for the school and the community. So where at the beginning there was only one thing, now it really becomes a problem of densification of this already dense area. So the proposal we did is what you see here. The library that closes the existing school and will share the playground with the school, the market that you see here below, and this building, cantilever, which is the sports hall. So these three elements that you see here, again, the library, the sports hall, and the market, define a new public series of spaces. These sort of plazas, pedestrian plazas in between. Interesting is to see that we had to solve in a very narrow place different questions. For example, the children of the school or the school that belongs to the city allowed to build here, but we had to keep the patio for the children, which is of course like that. So as a consequence, the building, and you see it better here, becomes a bridge. It has to be a bridge because the children have to need the space below. Or here the same way, this very big cantilever building is a very large sports hall that becomes a window to the rooftops and the roofs of Madrid. So this connection between these three elements that you see only in this section have to solve also difference of layers of a very complex urban building. We create a new terrace here. This terrace will become a public area for a cafe or a lounge. So you have an elevator, an escalator going directly. This is a sports hall over there. This is a library, and this is a place where the children play, and this is a super big parking, etc., etc. So the building, after years, also linked to this economical crisis that made everything slower, has been finished now and not yet occupied. You see here what I mentioned before and some of these images of this rather enclosed building, because it uses this very large 50 centimeters white uglas, in some cases with transparency, in some others simply as cladding, depending on the place. For example, the market is very, very enclosed because they really needed all the space for. We didn't do the interior in this case, but the exterior of the project belongs to this, say, interpretation of a complex place. This is what I mentioned before. This is actually a bridge, and this is completely empty because the school is behind. This is the library. The library is overlooking this new plaza. This is the playground of the children behind. This is the intermediate space. These interstitial spaces that for us in many of our projects become the key question. Intermediate space that allow you to go into the market. The market connects galleries at different levels. There will be this long escalator going to the terrace or these connections between different elements, sometimes very tight, protected from the rain, but nevertheless an open public space, and the terrace with the rooftops in the distance. It's interesting for us that during the construction of this market, library, etc., that took many years, more than expected. When we won the competition, we were asked to do a temporary market. They say, okay, people need to sell, of course, the product. They said during these 2 years, at the end of 2 years were almost 5, but it is alive. And then, so we have to make a temporary market and please think something to do in the nearby plaza. So actually, if this is the market I show you and the library and the school, here in the plaza that is nearby, we propose this project that at the end, in a way, a humble project because it was to be temporary. It was not so expensive at all. Nobody paid very much attention to it. It became a very important project for us, actually, because it allowed us to test ideas that we were working on time ago. In other words, what we propose is what you see here, a system of combinatorial elements that can be organized together. It is actually, as you see here, 6 pavilions. The 6 pavilions have a pentagonal form. This pentagonal form is a consequence of this area at the end of the markets in the plaza, which is so traditional, but had to incorporate many stalls because there are very many small merchants. Yeah? So what we, again, decided is to design, maybe because we are very lazy, and then we decided to design only one thing. We decided to design one pentagon, and then this pentagon can be repeated And the Pentagon is exactly the same, but it has an inclinated roof. So when you turn it, you rotate it, then the appearance changes completely. And then we designed a second one, which is basically the same, a little bit bigger, and we repeat it again 3 times. So as a consequence of that, the intermediate space that you see there in white becomes this interior street that allow the people to go in and out to the different places. The building was built very quickly, and it was built with materials that for us were very interesting, are, in general speaking, very interesting, but we always doubted, like, for example, the polycarbonate. We liked it very much, but I don't know how long it lasts good. But for this, it was perfect. It should be only 2 years. At the end, it's 4, but nevertheless, okay? And you see here an important thing for us, that it is a too big building for the area, but by means of breaking it in units, by means of rounding the corners, by means of inclinating the roof in different ways, the scale suddenly becomes, at least we see it like that, much smaller than it's to really build a big, tent or something like that. So the building was used. Now they closed it, as far as I know, almost 2 weeks ago, because finally the people went to the other place. Here, but in the other place, we were not able to do the interior, and I think it's something I don't like what they did. Whereas here, nobody cared, so we did also the interior, very basic, but as you see, this interior street protects its outdoor space. It protects from the rain, basically, or the sun, depending on the time. And the interior is simply a very light structure with natural light and the merchants inside. But important for us, again, is this idea to give something else that we were asked to do. And in this case, it became, at least during a lot of time, that they really did it like that, because in the last months they forgot to do it. And so, but to really become a sort of a lantern in the city, a place that is also, in a way, an installation, and even if it's as I said, a humble thing, relatively, because it's simply a modest temporary market. Yeah? But for us, it has to do with a theme that I mentioned at the beginning, this idea of the patterns, the serial patterns, how to define only 1 or 2 elements, and by means of that, achieve complexity. And in that sense, the building I'm showing here is probably a big step forward, because it's much more complex related to these themes. We are here in the city of Córdoba again. So Córdoba in the south of Spain, linked to the history of the old Arab times, which is so important in the city. And in this case, we are working here. This is the old city of Córdoba. Here you see a corner of one of the most, if not the most important building in Spain for me, which is the mosque of Córdoba, the Mezquita, an impressive building. This is the river. And here, there's an area where there was a competition. This is a mosque that I mentioned before. This impressive structure that was built in the 8th century, and it was extended in the 9th, in the 10th, in the 11th. The building had itself the possibility to be ever extended because it's simply a grid of double arches. And then the Christians came and they built a cathedral in the middle, but they didn't destroy the mosque, so it's a very, very interesting thing. Here, in front of the mosque, which is here, there was this competition for this contemporary art center. The competition has a story behind, because you see here a very large building, maybe some of you recognize because at the time it was very much published, which is by Rem Koolhaas, which is a congress center for Córdoba. The story is that there was a competition here, like, I don't know how many years ago, probably 8 or 10. The competition here was for this building, for a congress hall, etc. They invited 5 or 6 international architects and Spanish. All the architects, of course, did the project here, because this is what they were asked, except Rem Koolhaas, who said, no, this is not the right place. The right place is here. That belongs also to the city. And he won. That was... The others complained very much. I can understand why. But Rem Koolhaas won the competition and started the planning. As a consequence of that, this was empty. So that was the good years in Spain where there was money to invest in many things. So the local government decided to do another international competition, in this case for a contemporary art center. In this case, they invited us. And in this case, we won. So as a consequence of that, we are doing, and we finished that building, but this building was never built and will never built because of the crisis that was so strong that there is no way to do that, and they forgot completely about that. So this is a story, but it has to do something with our project as well, because you will see that the roofs of our project are very important again. They were thought, they say, okay, since Remco has this big building with hotel, then they will see the roof. So now the roof can be seen only from the sky, but this is also important, no? that even if it's only from the sky, the roof is well done. Because we were not only there, and not only with a very contemporary and very attractive project, which is a contemporary center, so a Kunsthaus, so to say, for visual arts. That means for video art, net art, digital art, not for painting or sculpture. So it's another story. But on the other hand, this is, say, pure avant-garde of art. We were in front of this building that for us is so impressive. So not only history, of course. You can analyze it from a historical point of view, and then you talk about the Arabs and the different styles and so on. But you can analyze it from a very contemporary point of view, and then you see that this is a building that is done with one single element. The architects were lazy again, one double arch, and then repeated double arch, and then immediately this becomes an amazing space, a very contemporary space, actually, a place that can, as it proved to be, extended everywhere, and even include extensions like the church. So this was one issue. The other one was something that as the roofs, also ornament has been rejected always and with a lot of sense in modern architecture. But here we were not interested. So, when we look, and we were used to look to Islamic ornament, the word is always that, is ornament. But we started the competition saying, well, would we be able to, like in these mukarnas or masharabiyas, as they are called, could we really blow them up and convert them into architectural spaces, so inhabit sort of these small spaces. And that was the origin of this competition and the way we propose it. A series, as you see here, of voids, a series of hexagonal spaces that respond to a very logical pattern. They look in a first view like very random. They are not random at all. If you see an hexagon, this is, you don't see it here, no? But this is a perfect hexagon, exactly, a regular hexagon. You divide it in a room of 150 meters, another of 90, another of 60, which was basically these areas we were asked. And then simply by means of rotating, making symmetries, etc., you achieve an enormous, of course it's not an infinite, but it's an enormous system of possibilities that are variations, very much like it was done in the Islamic detailing, of spaces that become sort of a non-hierarchical space, which we wanted to, and that was the idea, that can be used in different ways. Yeah? So when they ask us, in many cases, how did you work with that, what program did you use, etc., we always say, of course, we started with that program, with the hands. We started, like, literally, it's not a... We started that. Immediately after that, of course, it becomes also a way of working with the computers to make it possible, and not to say also the detailing of these three-dimensional contemporary masharabiyas. Yeah? But what you see here is the system of the project, a series of hexagonal exhibition spaces, studios for the artist here, and an interior street, a little bit like in a souk, if you want to say it like that, or we wanted to say it like that. So the project really is organized with a double entrance, so you can cross it, enter from here. Each of this group of three is always the same. The spaces in between are patios, and the patios are sort of the leftovers of the regularity of the plan. The studios open to a garden. This is the river, and it's very blank, and you will see why. And then we have a black box, which is for any kind of event linked to media art and a mediatheque and complementary spaces. But more important than that is the section, because the section expresses this idea of how to inhabit one of these small details of the Arab ornamentation. Yeah? If these are the studios and the offices above, this is interior street, etc. These are these sort of inverted domes or inverted cones, as whatever we like to call them. The whole building inside wants to be in a way like a factory of art. Every time we were talking with artist friends, usually they said, why are you doing this building? Say, actually, what we like is an industrial building to do whatever. Say, okay, we do it because we want the competition and it's going to be built anyway. But from the very beginning for us, it was this idea that the building should be rough inside. It should be a sort of factory-like building that will be transformed by the artists themselves. So the only thing we provide is a series of spaces to which they will have to react, whether positively or negatively, but this is also part of the art intervention. And these sort of double walls allow, sliding doors to divide the spaces. You see a series of perforations. Every 90 centimeters there is a perforation where you can connect any kind of element, light, sound, beamers, whatever, so that in between people can walk here for service, etc. This is basically the project. This is a model. The model, of course, recalls, when you see from below the spaces, these things that appear to be very big, but these are taken in Alhambra, and this is, as you know, maybe 5 centimeters each of them. No, it's the idea of recreating this sort of space in a different way, and this is the process at the end that started with the hand models and the computer drawings and the model makers and the construction that was expressing from the very moment the idea, which is structure and space at the same time, and even the facade that we'll talk about it afterwards, because the facade became also an important thing. What you see here is the river, the model of the competition, the river, and a very long facade that will be seen from the other part of the river. So in this case, we asked, as we have done in several cases, another group of, in this case, artists, architects, and technical experts, so the three things at the same time, which is Realities United from Berlin, that had done the media facade of the Kunsthaus in Graz that we knew already, in order to work together on how this facade could be an element that can be used by the artists themselves. I will show it a little bit afterwards, because this is a building once finished. The building is finished but not in use. This is something that I have to explain every time, and it's difficult or easy. The easy thing is that the crisis has made everything slow. Now we are starting to do the exterior, and hopefully within the next year the building will be open. In any case, the building was finished, as you see here, and for us establishes immediately this relation because of the scale. It's much smaller as a mosque, but also with the white roofs of the old city of Córdoba that had, of course, this Arabic origin. This is the building when you see it from the other side of the river. It's important because you never see it in front of it. It's a very narrow path, only from this side. The other side, here just exterior and finish, is for the studios. So this is the area of the sort of staff and artists in residence that will be working there. The entrance is a sort of a leftover of the geometry. It looks again like random, and it's a strange randomness because it's not. It's simply, again, the negative space of the rather regular system that applies to all the spaces. Inside, as I said, everything is one material. It's a sort of factory-like project in which everything is done in concrete. Everything is done in concrete with wooden elements, in the same way we did in other projects. As you see here, the skylights come down. They are inverted skylights. Every time I show that, not in southern Spain, I understand that I have to explain that this could probably not be built in here, for example, or in Northern Europe, simply because of the rain that is solved here, but the snow, it really becomes like a swimming pool. But as you see, they are not hanging never in the middle of a room. They are always connected to a wall. That's the reason it can be done. As you see, the interior is sort of a labyrinth space where you can hang these sliding doors, and connect or disconnect these exhibition areas. When you look to the skylights, these inverted skylights, sometimes they are very compressed. You see this person there, and this is, or sometimes they are extremely high. So again, it's a project that, when looked in plan, looks the same. And when you look at it in section, it really becomes a completely different thing. Sometimes connecting the upper floors with the lower floors. In this case, in the area where the big media black box is proposed. This black box, for the moment, is an empty space full of holes and possible connections, and an area where there will be the possibility to include seats, etc., as you see there. In this case, the whole slab is part of the same polygonal system, but without a skylight. It simply has perforations so that from above things can be hung. The building has basically only one window. The big window looks towards the river. On the back side, there are the studios. The studios are connected. The studios are connected, and above they have other places to work on these intermediate spaces, and finally in the exhibition. The offices themselves are simply, as you see, with the same materials. In this case, in the floor is a sort of Eternit floor, false floor. The light here is quite an issue, because sometimes it's as you see here, but at some point of the day it becomes really the expression of this perforation of the facade. The building from above, I have seen from above most of our buildings, but not this one yet. And I really want to, because it's this image that represents the whole idea of the project from the beginning till the end. You see the patios there. The patios reflect these negative spaces of the roofs. Again, with our office, and not very legal, but it was so important to be in the roof and have this feeling of the city. For us to be in a roof, like to be below earth, I insist several times, it becomes a very, very strong impression in architectural projects. The patios are really simply looking to the sky, and they become therefore simply this other window to the sky. What about the facade that I mentioned before? The facade was important again, like in many of our projects, in this case because it should be related to this area of transmitting to the exterior the possibilities of this visual art center. So if we had that roof that we have above in the model, the facade was easy. In principle, it should be only a reduction, a zoom of this roof in a way. What it is actually is, as you see in some of these images, each of these elements is a bowl. And this bowl, which is faceted or inclinated elements, they have LED lamps in each of them. At the end, you can say that each of them is a pixel, and we have 1,500 pixels of different sizes developed in detail by Realities United, so that each of them, together with a digital program, becomes a means of expression of artistic intervention, including videos and film, of course. But it's not at all a media facade. It's, of course, it has nothing to do with a football stadium or a commercial video facade. It's really an expression in itself. And I think it's important maybe to see this short video done by Realities United with us of the way it works. course, as you have seen in this facade, the main thing is what you see here. That we wanted from the very beginning not to make a facade where you see glass or lighting. You simply see these glass reinforced concrete panels, completely blank, and nothing makes you think that this can work almost magically like it works, unless you go very close. And when you go very close to the facade, then you see that it hides a trick, and the trick is that you have these LED lamps in the corner. So at the end, the facade in the distance during the day appears like a blank facade. During the night, when it is in use, it admits this possibility that you see here. As I said, the building is yet without use, but there was something that we asked to a group of young artists called Taller de Casquería, that is to make an intervention where the building was not yet finished. And I think it's interesting to see this relationship between the people and the human body and the architecture itself. And I will end very briefly with the last project, which is in the end the project in which we are working now. The last competition we won, that in a way relates to all these issues that we are talking about during this lecture. It is, in this case, in this place that probably you don't know, Laulasma. This is in Estonia, quite far away from Córdoba, in the very, very extreme north of Europe, where there was this competition that for us was very important for a musician that many of you surely know, Arvo Pärt, who is a very special figure in Estonia and a very special musician that many of you know, and in which, in this area, this beautiful landscape where he was living as a young person, the government of Estonia and the foundation of Arvo Pärt is going to establish his own center, which is archive, museum, concert area, etc. Actually, the place is amazing. It is what you see, what you hear in the sound now is one of these compositions by Arvo Pärt, Spiegel and Spiegel, because it expresses very well this idea of this place and the way we understood this relationship between music and architecture when we had the chance, as it is the case, of working together with such an artist as he is. Actually, the place is what you see here. It's in the very flat lands of Estonia, in front, as you know, only a few kilometers from Finland, in this very high pines, woods, and areas near the sea. Actually, Arvo Pärt and his music, as you can hear and as some of you know, is very much about this, in my point of view, this relation to the silence. Actually, he's a musician and a composer. Nowadays, and I didn't know, the most interpreted composer in the world in terms of contemporary music, but very much linked to this idea of the void, the silence. So for us, the competition started from the very beginning, again, with our own background and ideas, but of course, how to relate to this idea of silence in the work of Arvo Pärt and to the architectural project. Silence could be translated into void, and music, of course, is full of these references I was mentioning before about combinatorial thinking, about variations of one single themes. So the proposal is the one you see here in the model, a system of voids which are patios again. And these patios are not randomly placed, they are placed exactly where all the trees are in order to avoid to tear down the trees of this very dense wood area. So as a consequence of that, when you see the plan, the plan is basically or exactly only in one single floor. It's an area that incorporates entrance, it incorporates library, it incorporates the room that Arvo Pärt had in Berlin where he was living during 30 years before coming back to Estonia, includes a little chapel that was important for him and his wife in one of the patios. It incorporates a small auditorium that now is a little bit bigger, only for 150 people, cafeteria, and the archive of all his life and his works. As a consequence of this, all these patios define these empty spaces or these voids within these woods, almost with the idea that the project will disappear again. This links it also to the beginning of this lecture when I was talking about this idea of the ground and how even the competition model at the beginning makes it difficult to understand where the building is. It's only a roof on top of this topography that in principle we are not going to touch except the minimum, and with the trees that you see in the middle of the space. The renderings explain also a little bit of this idea, that is to support the whole building with very slender columns. And these very slender columns, of course, echo the beautiful landscape of the space of these woods within, again, a single roof. The other special element will be a tower. Arvo Pärt wanted a tower for himself. He said, respect the trees, but I want a tower because I want to go up and look at the sea. So the tower is it's again based on a composition of Arvo Pärt in a very personal interpretation, which is his helicoidal structure, very simple, with a little stair and a small elevator and a place where in the distance he will be able to look at the sea and to the landscape. And this last image shows an image of the building that for us is a good way of ending the lecture, because in a way represents as well these themes that I show at the beginning, and one way or another were common to many of the projects. In other words, the relation to the ground as an origin of the project, the void, in this case, understood as a sequence of patios, the combinatorial patterns as a way of dealing with the system, and of course the roof that defines and gives the whole sense to the project. So thank you.